welcome. Rhino.Inside.Revit. Is it right for my firm, or is it right for me? Is it right for my company? Thank you for having me, Applied Software. We're gonna have a nice discussion today. We still have some people filtering in, right? So as we allow people to filter in, we'll just get started with the intro. All right, so yes, I am Marcello Sgambelluri. I'm the Director of Advanced Technology at John Martin Associates, a structure firm in Los Angeles. I have been working in the industry for this December will actually be 22 years. Here's some of the projects I've worked on in the past. That right there is the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Let's see here. Also, one of the more recent projects I did was architect Frank Gehry's home out in Santa Monica. It's actually Playa del Rey in California. And then here's some families I've built in Revit in the past. Here's the Revit elephant, cow, goat, and so on. So what I do is I try to push software to its limits and show everybody how to do it in a simple way. I also run a blog site and a podcast called simplycomplex.org. It's kind of a media hub, really. I've got a podcast there. I've got a blog site. Check it out. I've got a comic book, too, that kind of pokes at the industry a little bit. And then I'll talk about this a little bit more. I have a Dynamo and Grasshopper for Revit reference manual coming out very soon. So head over to simplycomplex.org and sign up for updates. Okay, what is Rhino.Inside.Revit? Then we can decide if it's right for you. Rhino.Inside.Revit. Rhino is a software made by McNeil out of Seattle. And if you Google Rhino.Inside.Revit right now, you will find a lot of information, mostly by McNeil. They did do an excellent presentation at the San Francisco Computational User Group back in February. They kind of went over the background of the software. I'm going to talk more about the foreground and how it works practically, so you can make a good decision if it's important and right for you. All right, and also for any attendee here, if you'd like to just type in a question, feel free to do it. I'll take it at any time. Feel free to do that. Let's see, anyone else in attendance, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to do that. I'd love to have this as an open discussion. All right, so what is the issue, and why is this software really here? The issue is when we typically have a Rhino model, we need to actually get it into Revit if you want to do documentation. So the idea here is that you have Rhino information, and this is where you do all of your design and 3D modeling. But you can't document with Rhino, so you need Revit to do coordination and documentation. So you need a way to get your information into Revit. This is an issue called interoperability, which is always a problem in our industry. Whether you're using Rhino or some other 3D modeling program to do your design, maybe it's SketchUp or some other program. So how do you get that into your BIM modeling software so that you can document it? That's kind of the issue that the industry has. The idea that most architecture firms do not design inside of Revit would be a whole nother webinar, quite honestly. But the reality is you take a snapshot now. If you're using Rhino, then you're using it for design and 3D modeling. How do you get that information into Revit? This new tech can really, really help you with that. Okay? Now, if you are not using Revit in your office, however, you are getting Revit models from a consultant, or if you're a structural engineer and you're getting Rhino models from the architect and you need to get into your Revit models, then this technology would be also available to you. Even though you're not authoring the Revit model, but you interact with, even if you're not the author of the Rhino model, but you need to interact with the Rhino model to get that information into Revit, this technology is going to help you. So I'll just go over this briefly, but this is a problem that plagues our industry, that getting Rhino information into Revit. There's a few ways that are currently being done. Of course, you could just remodel it from scratch. I should mention that there is you can't take your Rhino information and just save it as a Revit file. You can't do that. Save as RVT. That's just not an option. And also, Rhino is a generic 3D modeling program. So as you model things in Rhino, they may not necessarily be intelligent objects. So even if you were to export Rhino into Revit, you would still need to tell Revit what the information is. So for example, if you had parking in your Rhino model and you wanted to bring that into Revit, well, what is it? Is it a floor? Is it a roof? Is it SAT import? So what kind of material does it have? What category am I going to put it on? So because Revit is a BIM software, it needs intelligent information behind it. And that information needs to be given by the user. So again, you could remodel the whole thing from scratch. Believe it or not, this is a very, very common thing to do in our industry. You can also use an SAT import or a DWG import or some other import. This is less desirable because then it doesn't come into Revit in a meaningful way. It may come in as an unintelligent blob, when in fact you need intelligent information in order to cut sections through it, document it, tag it, do all the smart things you need to do to it in Revit to document it and to coordinate it. Another one is there are a few add-ins in the industry right now that allow you to take some Rhino information into Revit. A real popular one right now is Mantis Shrimp, or that goes through Dynamo, or you could use Conveyor, which is kind of a derivative off of Rhino. So there are some options to do that, although those are very specific about what type of information comes in. So in order to solve this problem, the McNeil company said, well, why fight it? Why don't we just do this? Why don't we just take Rhino and we'll stick the whole thing inside of Revit? That was the idea. If we take the entire Rhino program, which includes Grasshopper, and we stick it inside of Revit, now Revit has access to all of Rhino's geometry, all of Rhino's methods and functionality, all of Rhino's Grasshopper functionality, and we can help solve this interoperability issue. So now what you can do is you can take a Rhino model, pieces of it, or the whole thing, either one. You can pass it through the conduit, which would be Grasshopper, and then you can create Revit models in a meaningful way. Now, this means a lot because it's meaningful. What is the meaningful way? Okay, what's the difference? Did we get a question? What's the difference between Rhino, Inside, and Conveyor? Ooh, good question. Thank you. We'll answer that question as we move forward, what the difference is. They do rely on similar technology, quite honestly. Conveyor allows you to take Rhino elements into Revit, although things are preset for you. Rhino Inside Revit is a bit more broad, and you're allowed to be more flexible with how you decide how you want information to come over. So I'm gonna describe it in a little bit more detail on how the difference is here. Okay, so think of Rhino Inside Revit as a piece of gold, yet the user needs to shape it in order to use it in a meaningful way within their office workflow. That's really the major difference with Rhino Inside Revit and other technologies, is you have the flexibility to really do anything you want. Make custom nodes, make custom functionality, do things that you mold into your company's specific needs, as opposed to an add-in that is a little more locked down in how certain workflows are played out. Does that help answer your question? I knew a question came in for that. That's one of the major differences. Okay, we'll see if that's a yes or a no. Okay, alrighty. So that's the idea. Okay, but what isn't Rhino Inside Revit? Rhino Inside Revit, as I showed you, is a piece of gold. You do need to mold it yourself using Grasshopper to help you bring elements over, which is advantageous. As I said, you can make it specific to your workflow. What it is not is you just can't take Rhino inside Revit, press a button, and then everything magically converts over. Again, I mentioned this before. The reason you can't do this is because you need to talk to Revit, and you need to talk to Rhino, and you need to tell them what is what. And each model, each person that models, each instance, each project is all very different. So in this particular example, there's decisions that would need to be made. And as we move forward, we'll go through a live demo. But even this particular example, right? Let's look at this. This is a Rhino model. This surface right here is what we call BREPS, or BREP surface. In this case, it's representing some type of topography. Yeah, now that one's pretty obvious, right? So as you take that element and bring it over to Revit, you would expect it to look like topography, maybe have a material of earth, that sort of thing. That's kind of obvious. What about this area here? This would be parking, yeah? But what type of element would this be inside of Revit? What size would it be? What type that you pick within, what type of family would it be, right? Is it going to be a system family? Are you going to bring it in as unintelligent geometry just for visualization, right? Rhino doesn't know that, so you need to tell it that. That's why you need interaction. You need to be able to mold your workflows so that it's specific to your project, your model. So maybe in some cases you would want this parking to be a floor element in Revit. But what type of floor element if you went that way? Maybe you would want it to be a roof element. What type of roof element? What about this particular element here, which would be a ramp? Yeah, let's say this scenario is this is a walking path, maybe at a state park, and this is parking area. This is the ramp to drive up, and then this is another walking path up here to maybe an observation deck. Let's say this is the project. What would this element be right here? Well, it's a ramp, right? It's a speed ramp for the project, but how would that represent itself in Revit? Would you just take it and bring it in? And then what would it be? Would it be a ramp element? Would it be a road? Would it be a road element? Would it be a floor element? What type of material would it have? So you see, these type of decisions you have to make. That's why you don't just press a button and say go. You need to set these things up for your workflow. But if you do that, then beautiful things can happen, because now you can take meaningful information from Rhino into Revit. Okay, so let me just go over how that's gonna work. Okay, and we got a yes, thank you for the difference. Yes, I would encourage you to actually look at all options: Rhino inside Revit, conveyor, other add-ins, and you can decide for yourself which way you'd want to go. That's the whole point of this webinar, is for you to try to make decisions. I certainly couldn't do that for you. You need to do that on your own. I'm just here to help you, give you some information that can help you make those decisions. Okay, so how do you get started? It's pretty simple. All you need to do is you need a license of Rhino. You need to get the plugin Rhino inside Revit. It's fairly simple, and then you would basically install it inside of Revit, and it would look like this. So basically, you get a tab that you're able to open up Rhino and open up Grasshopper within Revit. That's why it's called Rhino inside Revit, and I now call it Grasshopper inside Revit. If you were using Rhino in the past, I call that Rhino outside. So this is actually Rhino inside. Okay. All right, so how do you get started? I already kind of went through that. Let's talk more about this interoperability issue, which is everyone is mostly focused on this with this technology. This technology, quite honestly, has a lot more to do with just interoperability, but I think for the discussion of if you're trying to make a decision, if this is right for you, it's a good idea to understand the interoperability issue, because this is probably, quite honestly, the biggest one. And so, like I said, there is no export from Rhino to Revit. There is no save as RBT file. We already went over that. So as you think about how you're going to get information from Rhino into Revit, you need to decide what is what. So there's basically four methods to get Rhino information into Revit, and we can explore these a little bit more as we move through some live examples. Okay, so you can think about it this way. There's 4 methods here: Rhino to Revit, or basically bake Rhino geometry into Revit. One is just take geometry and simply bring it in as a direct shape. You can kind of think of this as like an unintelligent SAT. So this is basically it. Now, you're looking at Grasshopper nodes, and these are just simple examples. I also want to mention that you don't have to bring in your entire Rhino model. In fact, that's probably not advisable. You take the whole Rhino model and shove it into Revit. You need to make decisions for each element that is inside of Rhino, because you may not want to bring everything in, right? And we can get into that a little bit later. But these are decisions that you definitely need to make. Okay, so one way is just a simple, it's called a direct shape. You just basically take whatever geometry you want from Rhino, and it brings it into Revit as a generic model, and assigns a default material to it. Now, this may be good if you want to do visualization or get quick geometry in to do studies on geometry, things like that. But it certainly wouldn't help you much if you wanted to document it and tag it, because it's basically just a step up of actually using an SAT import. That's one. The next one here is the ability to actually use a direct shape again. And direct shape is, if you're not familiar with the term direct shape, is basically an API, a Revit API function or functionality that allows you to bring geometry into Revit. Is basically, you may hear that direct shape, quote unquote direct shape. It just means you can bring geometry into Revit. It's very limiting because at its extent, you're able to do option 2, which is basically you're allowed to bring in geometry into Revit. Well, that's what this prep node is here, geometry. You're able to assign a category. You're able to assign a material, and you're able to assign a name. Now, that is sometimes desirable because it is one step above just bringing in all the geometry in one category. The advantage here is that it can bring geometry in a bit more meaningful way. And so in this particular example, do you see this particular element here? You could actually bring this in as a direct shape, and you could assign a road category to it, not just a generic model. If you didn't know, there's actually a road category inside of Revit. So this may be, this may be an option here. Okay, so that's option 2. Option 1 is just a direct shape, generic model, no materials assigned it, pretty much default. The next one is you're able to assign as a direct shape, generic category, a material, and a name. Okay, the next level of complexity to get an information in is step 3 here, okay, which is you have the ability to take Rhino geometry and you're able to place it inside of a family template and then load the family template into Revit. So you could it actually takes geometry from Rhino and it brings it into the family template. You can assign a family template. You can assign a family template, maybe a generic model, maybe a structural framing, whatever template you're comfortable with. You can assign it a category. A category could actually be different than the default category of a template, and then you can actually load that inside of Revit. So it embeds your geometry inside a family. The advantage there is that you have the ability to make geometry repeatable in an actual family where the geometry is being controlled by Rhino, not Revit. This is very advantageous, especially when you have very, very small custom geometry inside of Rhino, like maybe a Corinthian column or maybe some furniture, things like that. Maybe smaller things that you want to make a separate family for. This is very advantageous. The fourth option is you actually take the Rhino geometry and you recreate the element as a native Revit element in Revit. So for example, this red surface here which is a BREP in Rhino, which would represent a topo surface. This one would be a good candidate to use number 4 on. You can take this geometry and then you can rebuild the topography in Revit as a topography element. And it just takes 6 nodes, right? And now you have a native Revit element that you can assign, you can tag, you could put entourage and host to it. It is a Revit element. It is just, its geometry is controlled by Rhino. Okay, so these are the 4 methods. So as you look about how you want to get geometry into Revit, these are the 4 methods that you would be using. And quite honestly, through the project, through the life of the project, you'd be using any variety of these because some of them make more sense than others. So to help you kind of decide what to do, I'm gonna open a model and we can talk about what method we want to use, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay. All right. So and then we can get into other examples. Okay. So let's do it. Let's talk about. Let me open a. This one's already finished. Let me delete that. So let's talk about bringing in topography. Okay. So let's say we have a Revit model. It's virtually blank. Okay. So what you would do is if you want to get your Rhino information into Revit, then let's open up Rhino Inside. So the way you would do that is you would install the add-in, and then you would go to your add-ins, and then you would activate this here, which would be Rhino. It says Rhino WIP, which means work in progress. It runs off of Rhino 7, which is actually not commercially available yet, but it is in beta form. You are able to get the version 7 if you have a license of version 6. So yes, it is in beta format, although don't let that scare you as you look into this technology, because beta versions are basically part of our industry, right? I mean, we could argue that we work with beta versions all the time, right? Aren't schematic drawings beta versions of the construction drawings, the final construction drawings that go to the building department, right? So we're used to working in beta versions. This just happens to be software. So if you have a problem with beta versions, then you may need to rethink how you work with schematic drawings. Just saying. But anyway, it is beta version. Go ahead and check it out. Okay, so we are opening the Rhino Inside right now. It is a little slow. Maybe there's time for questions as we open this up. Here we go. Any more questions from the audience? We're good? Okay, we're good for now. All right. Alrighty, so this is how it works. So let's say we have an existing Rhino model. I'll go ahead and open that example that we've been going over and over again. So basically, this is Rhino. I had it in my other window. This is Rhino Inside. The reason you can tell is because it doesn't actually show up as a separate icon down on the bottom. It's running within Revit. So if I were to close Revit right now, it would close Rhino because this is Rhino Inside. Okay, so let's open up that model. Okay, so let's go. Let's open up that model. Here we go. Okay, so this is the model we're working with, right? This is the model that was done. Maybe it was done by you, maybe by your exterior team, whatever. But you have this model, and now you need to get this information into Revit. So, what decisions do you need to make? Well, let's talk about this big surface right here. Okay, this is a BREP surface inside of Rhino. So we could decide what to do. How do we want to get this information into Revit? Let's just talk about this topo surface right now. Okay, so what we would do is let's look back at Revit. So how would we do this? Would we want to bring it in as a unintelligent direct shape? Let's explore those options. So if we go to Grasshopper here within Rhino Inside, it opens up Grasshopper Inside. You could also open Grasshopper Inside from within Revit, either one. I should mention too that you actually don't need to open Rhino Inside to open Grasshopper Inside. You could open up Grasshopper Inside first. Yep. Okay. So let's show you how that works. Okay, so basically what you need to do is you open up Grasshopper Inside, and then if you see there's actually a Revit tab right here, okay? And in here is all the different functionality within Grasshopper that can work with Revit. Okay, we talked earlier about a direct shape. So there are some direct shape options to get geometry into Revit. One would be this simple one, which would be add direct shape. Okay, maybe we can talk about this one. So if we decide to use it just to bring the geometry in as default geometry, we don't have control over material or category or anything, you may want to use this one. Sometimes this is good actually for early on. So let's see how that would play out. All right, so what we would do is we would need to be able to select the geometry out of Rhino. So this says BREP. This is actually Grasshopper geometry. So we need to get the Rhino geometry, get it into Grasshopper geometry, feed it into this node, and it'll build the geometry in Revit. So how do we do that? If you're not a seasoned Grasshopper user, I'll just walk you through it. Basically, under params under geometry, we're going to say BREP here. We're going to place this down. We'd right-click and say set one BREP. And since I was already selecting the topo surface inside of Rhino, it automatically selected that BREP surface inside of Rhino. You can also tell because it actually is previewing the Grasshopper geometry inside of Rhino, which happens to be the exact size and everything, which would make a lot of sense. Okay, so now this basically converted it to Grasshopper geometry. Now we take that Grasshopper geometry and we just feed it into this node, and this will actually build a direct shape inside of Revit. And let's see how that manifests itself. Do you notice there's no input ports here for name or category? Okay, so let's go back to Revit, and here it is. Okay, so you see this red surface is just previewing the Grasshopper geometry inside of Revit. You can turn that off here. All right, so now this is basically that topo surface inside of Revit. Okay, now if I click on it, it actually puts it in a generic model, but there's no other information here, no material, nothing. So the question is, do you want this as your option to bring in geometry? Maybe. Maybe you're just doing visualization. Maybe you're doing a quick report. Maybe, okay? So you have the ability to do that, but that may not be what you want. So you need to study each one of these examples. You don't have to physically study them, but you need to go through them in your mind. How am I going to bring this in? Is it going to be a direct shape? Should I bring it in as a direct shape, yet a direct shape such that I have control? So let's go ahead and disconnect that. Have control as a direct shape, but instead of just a direct shape, I want direct shape, but I want control over the ability to add a name, a category, and a material. So this may be another option that you may want to pursue. So I won't go through this whole thing, but you could feed in the geometry, and then you can set the category kind of either by right-clicking, and then you can choose a category here, or you can actually go to this input tab over here, and then you can go here to model category picker, and then you can select a category this way. So I imagine in this particular case, if you were going to go this route, you would probably pick a topography category. You would probably pick this one. Yeah. And you would probably pick an earth material, right? But if you start getting that detailed, then you need to ask yourself, why am I doing it that way? Why don't I just rebuild this geometry as a topography element? Yeah. So there is an option to do that. Okay. So, excuse me. So there is the ability to do that. So basically, the way that would work is you can actually create topography. So it says add topography by points. I actually forgot where this was. They move these menus around just a little bit. Well, let's see here. Okay, it's under site, which makes sense. Under site, under add topography points. Okay, here we go. So basically what we would do is we would use this particular one. We would add points, and you could actually add regions as well, and it would create the topography. So I actually have one that's already pre-baked for you, so I won't have to keep throwing these nodes down. But basically, you would extract the points out of the BREP in Rhino, and then you would feed it in. So let me show you how that works. I have a pre-baked one. And even if that's taking a little bit of time, I can just show you basically, this is how it works. Here we go, right? So basically you feed in, you subdivide the surface inside of Rhino, and then you use those as points. I flatten the points, which means I just crushed them into one list, and I feed them into the create points by topography, and then you basically end up with a topography element that looks like this. Where's it at? The final one. That looks like this. It looks like this. Okay, which is actually a topography element. Let me see if I was able to open. Looks like we're still spinning here. Maybe because I had one open already. Did I crash? Maybe so. Okay, may have to reset this. Okay, well, all right, we'll see what's going on there. I closed the program. I crashed the program. Awesome. I always say, if you're using Grasshopper for Revit or Dynamo for Revit and you haven't crashed Revit, then you're probably doing something wrong. Okay, anyway, you would open it. I had that pre-baked one and it works. But all right, so I think because I had the model already open and then I tried to open another one, that's probably what happened. All right, so anyway, any questions up to this point? How many projects? We've got another question. All right, here we go. How many projects? Good question. The question is about current users. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. In the firm that I work in, good question. I see a Dynamo player button. Let me get Revit back open, and then we can have that conversation. The question was about player. Very good question. So I think basically this whole exercise is I just wanted to show you that you basically need to make a decision on how you're going to bring information in. I had some more examples, but I don't think we necessarily need to go over them, which basically just went over all the different ways you could bring in different geometry and what decisions you would need to make based on this graphic, right? So which type of method do you use? I shifted these around, but we're still kind of aligned. All right, which 4 methods do I use? All right. Okay, so I had some more examples that I could go over there, but I think I keep driving the point home. You need to decide each element, how to bring it in. That's why there's no easy button. You got to work with it, with the Rhino database, as well as who's ever authoring Rhino and what to do. Okay, so the question came in, which was, as this opens, there is a Dynamo player button, which is a very good question here. I do have it here. I do have it here. There is a Dynamo player. I keep saying Dynamo player. There is a Grasshopper player button in the menu that you're actually able just to run your Grasshopper script right from Rhino. Or you can run it right from Revit. So if you have a preset script, let's say it takes your topography that is on a particular layer, your rep surface that is on a particular layer. Let's say this is what the script does. You have your topo surface on a particular layer. So let's go through this scenario. Okay. So in this Rhino model, let's say this topo surface is on a particular layer, which it actually is. It's on a topo layer. Let's say you build a script such that it selects all of the rep surfaces out of a particular layer, say a topography layer. It then subdivides it up to get the points, and then it builds a topography element inside of Revit. That's what the script does. Well, you are actually able to take that script, save it as a Grasshopper script. You're able to open up Revit without opening up Rhino or Grasshopper inside. You could actually play the script, and it would so you would basically click play. You'd load in the script, and then it would run the script. Okay, so that was a question there. Next question is, how many inside on your machine active users? Ooh, a very good question, active users. Okay, well, we're still in the process of actually evaluating the software right now. We have probably 7 licenses at the moment and users using this technology. These are great questions. What tends to happen is, and I'll show you this, is that as a structural subdiscipline, and as working in a structural subdiscipline firm, we get a lot of Rhino models that we need to extract so that we can make structure inside of the Revit structure model. So this is one summary of how to do that. So in this particular case, we have a Rhino model that has columns, solid columns. So what this particular script does is it takes the actual Rhino solid reps that are columns. It places a center line on them by using just these two nodes, basically. It takes those center lines and feeds them into the add column create node. You basically add a type, we'll get to that in a second, you add a level, and it will build the columns inside of Revit. Then if you wanted to take these columns in Rhino and they were to move around, Revit would automatically dynamically move these columns around as well. It would not delete them and add new ones. Okay. Also, one other beautiful thing is, if we can get this going again, is that a little known fact is that Rhino information that gets brought over to Revit doesn't just need to be geometry. This is kind of super cool. So basically, as a Rhino user, if you want to tell people about what information you want with that particular geometry, you can embed text or metadata in each element. So in this particular case, if you look here, these particular Rhino solids, which represent columns, also have what we call key value pairs in each one. And basically the key says the column size is this, HSS 12 by 12 by 1/4, which is in imperial units. But anyway, then the user who wants to build the Revit model can extract that information and add it to their Revit model. So in this particular case, what's happening is it's taking out that key value and then it's assigning it to the column type. So you could actually control a type from Rhino in Revit. It's a beautiful thing. So cool. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up as well. So you not only need to bring geometry over, and you're not only limited to geometry, but you also could bring in key value pairs, text, whatever wants to be added in there. So let me open that up as our time starts to kind of wind down here. So I will show you that here. I have two screens here. Okay, so this is that particular model, right, that we talked about. These are those particular columns. Now, if we select on one of these columns, you'll see here under the properties attribute text that actually it has this key value pair. So basically someone set this up, and on each element they said, okay, column size, I want it to be an HSS 12 by 12 by 1/4. Or maybe the designer says, listen, I want these to be no bigger than 1 foot by 1 foot wide. This type of information then could be shared through Grasshopper into Revit to help inform the team on how to do the modeling, how to keep track of all this information. Okay, so I thought I'd mention that. Okay, so where are we at here with questions? Okay, so we got, okay, good. Does that answer the question? Is it freezing for everyone? Is it? Are we slow?
You're not slow for me.
Okay, it looks like, okay, all right. Well, if it is freezing, it looks like the recording is not, so you could always reference the recording. I tend to get excited and talk a bit fast, too. Okay, cool. Some more questions flying in. Love it. What do we got here? Does Human UI work with Grasshopper? Lots of super powerful custom Grasshopper apps. Okay, so let me get to that. Let me get to that point, which is if I'm a Grasshopper user and I have all my custom add-ins like Human UI, which are great, Lunchbox by Nate Miller, excellent program. XMake component, or maybe you have a custom component. These, I was like, my grasshopper's not working. Here we go. All of those custom components will show up in Grasshopper Inside. In fact, they share the same. Folder in the special folder. They share, the same folder. Rhino and Grasshopper Inside, Rhino and Grasshopper Outside share the same folder for the component locations, so they will show up as in your Grasshopper Outside as well as your Grasshopper Inside. So in this case, I have an elephant, I've got human there, I've got kangaroo, I've even got my own component in here. Okay, the only caveat at this point is if the component is not designed for Rhino version 7, then it may not work, because Rhino.Inside.Revit, like I mentioned, is for Rhino 7. But I have noticed a lot of them do work, like Human UI, Human, and so on and so on and so forth. You can contact, if they don't work for you, you may contact your friendly component author, and they could probably help you with it. Okay, here we go. Let's some more questions. Off topic. What software template did you use to create these step-by-step instruction graphics? Brett, very good question. This is a bit of my brand, I suppose. These kind of what I call cheat sheets or one-page summaries. I'm actually in the process. You may have missed it in the beginning, Brett, but I'm in the process of actually writing a book, and I will share that a little bit later. But these are basically one-page summaries that summarize. You want to do this. You want to get Rhino to Revit column sizes. Basically, you put down these few nodes, no more than 13, and then this is what happens with some instruction. I have over 200 of these, and I'm putting a book together right now for both Grasshopper for Revit and Dynamo for Revit. They run side by side. But if you wanted to know what I use, these are primarily done through Photoshop. Yeah. In fact, what I plan to do as I promote the book, I will go through a few of these and how I actually create it from scratch, meaning how I actually come up with, okay, let's decide to do this. Then let's build the model. Let's take the screenshots. Let's annotate it, because it actually takes quite a bit of time to condense these into one page so that they're meaningful and have enough information for everybody to just kind of hit the ground running. Does that answer your question, Brett? Question from Tim. Have you managed to convert Rhino blocks into native Revit families? The answer is yes. Yes. And if you have a Rhino block, quote unquote, whatever it may be, then yes. And I would recommend in that particular case, you would use this method, which is method, can anyone remember? I'm making a cheat sheet on this at the moment. I suppose I have one here, right? At least a starter, which is this one. What would you use? In that particular case, yes, I have. I would take the block, let's say it's, whatever it is. Maybe it's this, that's probably a little bit too big. Maybe it's a statue up on this observation platform up here. I would actually take that block, I would place it inside a family template using this new family node, and then I would place it using Rhino.Inside.Revit inside of Revit. So the answer is absolutely. I do it all the time personally, and I have a page on that as well inside the upcoming book. There's a whole section. There's a whole section in the book on interoperability, and so there's a few more things we could go over. So here is that whole example we went over. The one that got crashed is summarized right here. Basically, is how do you get the topography into Revit as a topography element? Just use these 6 nodes or so, and it goes. So there's a chapter on the book on interoperability, how to do that. There's actually quite a few others. Maybe there's one more I can point out, which may be this. You may find that As I showed you in the Grasshopper example, if you look at the Revit tab, there are at the moment, there's about 172 nodes, right? Which is far less than Dynamo for Revit. However, they're building them all the time. But you do have the ability, if there is no out-of-the-box Grasshopper for Revit node for you, you have the ability to customize one yourself to tap the Revit API to do something. So case in point, for example, if you wanted to do wall by face, so we look at wall, there is no wall by face right now. There is only this one, which is basically the ability to add a curve and build a wall on a curve. I understand wall by profile is also on requested list. You can go to their GitHub site because this is open source. I understand that that is a highly requested one as well as wall by face. So for example, what I did is I actually showed, okay, if you want to do a wall by face. So for example, let's say you have an element here that's curved and a BREP inside of Rhino, and you wanted to actually use a wall by face. There is no out-of-the-box node at the moment to do that. There may be when this book comes out because this beta version moves so quickly. However, you're able to make a custom C# script and tap the Revit API and be able to code your own if you wanted to be able to do basically whatever you wanted with the API. So this custom script will make a wall by face if you feed it a particular Rhino surface. And then you apply a type to it and it'll do that. So I thought I'd point that out. And this is all spelled out in the interoperability chapter book that's coming out. Okay, I like these questions. What else we got? Okay, so we got the block question down. Are we good there? Did we answer that question, Tim? Your block question? Oh, there is one thing I have to mention. I have found on some occasions, and I brought this up to the developers, that if your geometry inside of Revit is grouped together, sometimes it will not convert. So in that particular case, you need to explode it. Although I understand they're working on that issue right now, because I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect, right? So if you can't find that it converts, it may be grouped. You may need to get it out of its group, or you may need to explode it, and then you could work with it that way. I have found a few isolated cases like that, Tim, and everybody else. Okay, any more questions here? All right, so let me just take this in for a landing, everybody. Okay, so we talked about 4 methods. Okay, and then just mention that there are nodes out there that are not just specific to interoperability. Like, for example, you can place text, you can change text to uppercase using Grasshopper for Revit. You can create levels, things like that. I have the upcoming book that actually is a side-by-side, basically Dynamo, how it's done, Dynamo for Revit, how it's done, Grasshopper for Revit, how it's done, side-by-side. This is how you do it in Revit. This is how you build levels in Revit using Dynamo for Revit. This is how you build levels in Revit using Grasshopper for Revit. Okay. Good question is, why would you want to know how to do it in Grasshopper if you already know how to do it in Dynamo? Well, for example, if you needed to get information out of Rhino, say you wanted to get the elevation of a particular floor that is a BREP in Rhino, and you needed to be able to extract that information to place levels inside of Revit. If you only knew how to do it in Dynamo, then you wouldn't be able to get that information out of Rhino. So it's good if you're using the Rhino database to understand Grasshopper for Revit so that you're able to work with the Rhino database. So in this particular example, maybe these levels aren't coming from a range you put in here. Maybe they're coming from a Z value that you pull out of Rhino. Okay. And then getting and setting parameters. I'm also at the same time kind of showing you how the book is laid out, basically side by side. How would you do it in Dynamo? How would you do it with Grasshopper for Revit? And don't forget, everybody, as we close this out, Rhino.Inside.Revit is a great technology, but it is a piece, it's a piece of gold, but remember, you need to shape it into your particular workflow. make a decision, how each and every element comes in. And sometimes, quite honestly, you don't have control of the Rhino model. It is another author coming from another office. You have no communication with them. You need to work with the model. So in that particular case, you need to make sure that you make a decision on how each one is done. Maybe if you have the ability to talk with the author, they can help organize it, put things in layers, maybe even use those special key value pairs to tell you kind of what is what. That would be helpful too. If you are the author or someone in your office is the author, then you have a bit more control over how things are laid out such that they can talk a little bit better with Revit. But no matter how Rhino was authored, you as the user of Rhino.Inside.Revit to get this information into Revit, you need to make sure you understand each and every element and how you're going to bring it in, because you're not just going to take it and throw it in, right? You're going to carefully use it, put it in, and figure out how is this going to be used downstream, how are my users going to tag this, document it, and so on. There's one thing I did not mention, which is you can take Revit geometry and bring it back into Rhino. So this is one example. Why would you do that? Well, I've seen some people actually build steps inside of Revit and then bring it into Rhino because maybe they like the way that Revit lays out stairs, maybe railings, then they put that inside of Rhino as part of their overall workflow. So there are some examples. What I did was I made a rhinoceros inside of Revit. I call this Rhino Billy because I keep saying Rhino inside Revit and it gets people confused. So this is Billy. He's a Rhino built inside of Revit. Basically, with 2 nodes, you can take Billy and put Billy inside of Rhino. This is a Rhino built in Revit converted to Rhino. It looks pretty good, huh? So you're able to go the other way as well. So you could go Rhino to Revit or Revit to Rhino, and anywhere in between. All right, so I think that closes out what I was going to say. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and anyone who's watching this on demand. Thank you very much. If you have questions, you can contact Applied Software, and I will see you next time.